Chapter 1831. The god's golden eyes pierced through the endless void and landed on the moon in the distance. He looked at Carrie, who was holding a newborn angel in her arms, and his face was filled with pure joy. She seemed to like the angel. The god suddenly thought of 100,000 years ago, when Carrie had just been born. A tiny baby girl was born in his hands. The silver-haired, silver-eyed angel had shown a beauty that could suppress all creatures from her infancy. The god thought with an expressionless face that Carrie and Lucian were the most beautiful angels he had ever seen. Of course, they were also the most beautiful angels when they grew up. Gu Shengyin suddenly stopped in the middle of putting down the angel. She raised her head in confusion and glanced at the sky. Lucifer noticed her movement and asked, "What's wrong?" Gu Shengyin looked away and put down the baby who refused to leave her arms. She shook her head. Nothing. Lucifer glanced in the direction she had just looked. Indeed, he didn't find anything, so he didn't care. They didn't know that this scene was clearly seen by the high and mighty god. "She's actually so sharp." The god's low voice echoed in the great cathedral. "God, Her Highness Carrie's power is rising very quickly," the Book of Creation on his lap said. The Book of Creation was the god's companion artifact. It was also the one that had accompanied the god for the longest time. Because Gu Shengyin had stayed in the crystal sky for 100,000 years, the Book of Creation was very familiar with this special Her Highness blazing angel. The other party's strength was rising too quickly. In terms of combat power, the current Carrie should be about the same as Lucifer. It sounded like it was very normal. But in fact, being able to be on par with Lucifer was an abnormal thing in itself. What kind of existence was Lucifer? Back then, the god had used up a quarter of his divine power to create everything in the world. Creating a single Lucifer had consumed 2/4 of his divine power. It could be said that Lucifer was a near-perfect creation that the god had used himself as a template. He had spent countless divine power and energy to create. It could even be said that Lucifer had completely surpassed the level of creation. In terms of strength alone, he was close to a demigod. In fact, in the heavens, the gods were just a form of faith. The one who truly ruled over heaven was Lucifer, the deputy ruler of heaven. After Lucifer was born, God used the last quarter of his divine power to create the other 6 seraphs. From this, it could be seen how huge the gap between the other seraphim and the seraphim was. Carrie's birth was a complete accident. Instead of saying that Carrie was a creation created by God, it would be better to say that she was a gift from the spirit of chaos to heaven. Before God created this world, the whole world was in chaos and darkness. It was God who couldn't bear the loneliness of time, so he broke the darkness of chaos and created everything in the world. After the heaven and earth were formed, the darkness of chaos began to disappear. Carrie was the last gift to God before the birth of the 7 seraphs, the establishment of the law of order in the world, and the disappearance of the chaos and darkness. Therefore, she was different from seraph from the very beginning. She was not born from the hands of God. Chapter 1832. At that time, the gods had allowed her to live in the crystal sky for a long time because they wanted to observe her better. But after 100,000 years, the gods had confirmed it. Carrie was no different from the other seraphs. She had the same pure mind, loved the light, and had a firm faith in the gods. The gods were finally relieved and began to hand over the matters of heaven to Carrie. On this side, Gu Shengyin followed Lucifer all the way to the office area of Angel Academy. The angel in charge had already received the news and was excitedly waiting for the arrival of the new dean. These angels did not have the slightest bit of jealousy at being robbed of their power. On the contrary, they were very excited that a Seraph Highness had come to be their dean. What a great honor it was to be able to work under Her Highness Carrie. Lucifer took Gu Shengyin to familiarize herself with the environment of Angel Academy before leaving. Gu Shengyin was very grateful for this. As a Seraph leader, Lucifer had to deal with many things every day. Under such circumstances, he took the time to accompany her. He was simply a good colleague in heaven. There was no night in heaven. The angels' work and rest time were strictly calculated according to the hourglass. Gu Shengyin stayed at Angel Academy for an entire day. After that, she discovered that there were actually several vice deans in Angel Academy. In addition, there were several assistant deans. It was also because of these people that Angel Academy had been able to operate normally for so many years without a dean. This also meant that Gu Xingyi's position as the dean of Angel Academy was completely in name. If nothing unexpected happened, her daily work would probably be to report to the academy and then spend the whole day reading books and enjoying the scenery in the Angel Library next to the academy. At most, there might be some big decisions or bills that she, as the dean, might need to look over and sign. Gu Xingyi breathed a long sigh of relief. She liked this job. A day passed. Gu Xingyi walked towards the teleportation array of the lunar sky, preparing to go directly from here to the crystal sky. Most of the angels in the moon sky were ordinary angels, so this place was completely different from the crystal sky where Gu Xingyi was and even the Jupiter sky where the seraphim lived. According to Gu Xingyi's description, this place was more like the human world in Gu Xingyi's previous mission. As far as the eye could see, there were rows upon rows of shops opened by the angels. The atmosphere was completely incompatible with the solemn heaven. Gu Xingyi saw a flower shop not far away. She thought of the passionate and shy angels when she first arrived on the moon today. What kind of flowers are these? Gu Xingyi asked as she pointed at a bunch of exceptionally beautiful flowers. The color of this flower was a gorgeous red. It was very big, with hundreds of layers of petals competing to bloom. Each petal was shining with a little bit of starlight. It was incomparably magnificent. Gu Xingyi was a little surprised. Because the gods liked holy and pure things, it was rare to see such a gorgeous and eye-catching flower in heaven. The owner of the flower shop was a two-winged angel. When he saw Gu Xingyi, his face turned red with excitement. "Your Highness, this is the holy flower of the elves from the mortal world, the elven flower." Elven flower? No wonder. Gu Xingyi instantly reacted. She had read in the classics that the holy flower of the elves was one of the most beautiful flowers in the world. It was also a treasure of the elves and was strictly forbidden from being picked by outsiders. Then there was a problem. Gu Xingyi stared at the shop owner. "The holy flower of the elves is not allowed to be picked by outsiders. Where did you get this?" Chapter 1833. High-level angels naturally had a strong level suppression for low-level angels. At this moment, Gu Xingyi just put away the smile on her face. She didn't do anything, but it was enough to make the angel pale. Facing Gu Xingyi's questioning, the angel didn't dare to hide anything. "This flower shop is Her Highness Gabriel's property. I'm just an employee." So it was Gabriel. Gabriel had a generous and forthright personality, and he had friends almost everywhere. It was said that the light elf king of the elves had a good personal relationship with her. If it was Gabriel, it was reasonable that she could get the elven flower. Her expression softened. "Don't be afraid. I don't mean to punish you." She pointed at the delicately packaged elven flower and asked, "How many crystal coins does this cost?" The angel quickly shook her head. "If you like it, Princess Gabriel, you can take it." Gu Xingyi frowned slightly. "What's the reason?" "I don't want to take advantage of this." The angel smiled and said, "You don't know. Her Highness Gabriel said a long time ago that in the places under her jurisdiction, as long as His Highness Lucifer and Princess Gabriel come to shop, it will be free. I don't dare to disobey her orders." Gu Xingyi raised her eyebrows. "What's the reason?" The angel quickly shook her head and said that she didn't know. Seeing this, Gu Xingyi didn't ask any more. She picked up the elven flower and left. He would thank Gabriel when the time came. The angel heaved a sigh of relief when he saw her figure disappear into the teleportation array. At that time, Her Highness Gabriel had said, "It's already a great honor for beauties like His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Gabriel to buy my things." However, the angel didn't dare to say this in front of Gu Xingyi. Therefore, the noble, beautiful, and generous Archangel Gabriel in heaven was actually a complete beauty lover. The moment Gu Xingyi returned to the crystal sky, God sensed it. Deity looked at Carrie out of habit. At first glance, he saw the bouquet in Gu Xingyi's hand. Because the attribute of the gods was light, the gods' favorite colors were white and gold, which were the purest colors of light in the world. He didn't like the extremely bright red color of the fairy flower. He even felt a little disgusted. But deity didn't care about the color of the bouquet. He recognized the flower. With the book of creation, which could be considered a cheat, God only needed to take a look at anything and the book of creation would be able to display all the attributes of the item. Of course, there was one exception, and that was Carrie. The god's gaze fell on the last row of words. The holy flower of the elves is also a flower of love. An adult elf will pluck this flower and give it to the person he or she likes. If the other party accepts it, it means that the other party has accepted his or her feelings. A flame of anger rose in Deity's heart. Who gave this to Carrie? There was no room for selfish desires in heaven. Who was it that dared to disobey his orders so blatantly? As the center of the crystal sky, the god was in a bad mood. The Holy Spirit power of the entire crystal sky started to stir. Gu Shangyin, who had accompanied the god for 100,000 years, immediately noticed this. Who made the god unhappy? 7th update. 3rd update. See you later. Moi, see the baby here. After reading the article, remember to vote for Gao Langjid. Chapter 1834. She quickly walked into the great cathedral and looked at the figure on the god's throne. God. She knelt down and asked in a low voice, "Why are you angry? Why am I angry?" God asked himself the same question. Was it because he saw the flower in Carrie's hand? Was it because someone violated the precepts of heaven? But how many of the tens of millions of angels in heaven had violated the precepts of the 7 virtues? A lot. Had he ever been angry when those angels violated the precepts? Never. Then, was it just because this angel was Carrie? God lowered his eyes and looked directly at the seraph kneeling on the ground with his light golden eyes. She was still holding the bouquet of bright elven flowers in her hand. She looked at him with the same trust and attachment as before. She was still his Carrie. She hadn't changed at all. The restless spiritual power in the great cathedral suddenly calmed down. At the same time, Gu Shangyin felt a gentle force lift her up. She stood up obediently and walked toward the figure on the god's throne. God didn't do anything, which meant that he acquiesced to her approach. Gu Shangyin walked until she was in front of the god's throne. She raised her head and looked at the figure shrouded in holy light in front of her. This holy light was very threatening to all creatures, but it didn't have any effect on Gu Shangyin. God, why are you angry? She asked the question again in a low voice. God looked at the seraph who was close to him. Her beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly. Her clear silver eyes were filled with obvious worry. She was worried. In this world, there were angels who were worried about God. All angels felt that God was omnipotent. He was the most powerful and couldn't have any emotions. But this seraph was worried about him. God felt that this feeling was very strange. He didn't answer Gu Shangyin's question. Instead he asked, "Carrie, are you worried about me?" This wasn't something difficult to admit. Gu Shangyin nodded. God's mood was brightened by her frank attitude. But he still said, "I don't need it, Carrie." Gu Shangyin's beautiful eyes curved into a smile. "I know that God is omnipotent. But, God, please allow your faithful followers to keep you in their hearts at all times." The god didn't say anything. He had to admit that Carrie's words made him feel better. Until he saw the bouquet of flowers in her hands. The deity asked, "Carrie, where did you get the fairy flower in your hand?" So God knew him? Gu Shangyin felt a little strange. She thought that the gods would not care about such trivial things. She answered honestly, "I was passing by the moon and happened to see this bouquet of elven flowers." She lowered her voice a little. "Carrie thinks that this bouquet of flowers is very beautiful. She wants—" She paused for a second. Then, as if she had mustered up some kind of courage, she looked directly at the god under the holy light and said, "I want to give it to God." Deity was shocked. Gu Shangyin's voice was somewhat strange, but it was concealed within the cold tone of his voice. Gu Shengyin didn't notice it. "You said, you want to give it to me?" Gu Shengyin was a little shy, but she still nodded. In her mind, deities deserved the best. But she didn't expect that after she nodded, the god sitting on the throne didn't speak for a long time. Gu Shengyin asked uneasily, "God, you don't like it?" Chapter 1835. God looked at the seraph who had accompanied him for a long time. She looked at him with attachment and trust in her eyes, but there was no lust. God instantly understood. Jiao Lian most likely had no idea what the elven flower signified. Looking at her cautious eyes, God's heart suddenly softened. He stretched out his hand and received the bouquet of beautiful elven flowers. God actually didn't like this color. But he said, "If it's beautiful, Carrie, I like it very much." He shouldn't have accepted it. God knew that what he should have done was to reject Carrie's words and tell her what the fairy flowers meant. This was the most suitable method, but Carrie would definitely be disappointed. God decided to pretend that he didn't know the use of the fairy flowers and just treated it as an ordinary gift. Gu Shengyin accompanied God for a while and left the great cathedral. Gu Shengyin put the flowers in a crystal vase not far from the god's throne. That place, before this, had always been filled with the holy light flower of heaven. After a long silence, the Book of Creation's voice sounded. "God, your attitude towards Her Highness Kalia has already surpassed that of ordinary creations." The Book of Creation didn't say one more thing. God's attitude toward Carrie had even surpassed that of His Highness Lucifer. In response to the Book of Creation's words, God looked down and said, "Carrie wasn't an ordinary creation." Hearing God's answer, the Book of Creation looked at God worriedly. As God's companion artifact, it could ignore the holy light that could block anything in the world and directly see God's expression behind the holy light. But God's face was the same for thousands of years. There was only that layer of eternal indifference. The Book of Creation couldn't detect God's thoughts. It could only sigh faintly and fall back onto God's lap as if it had become an ordinary book. God looked down and closed it. He also closed his eyes and began to rest. When they had nothing to do, the god and the divine artifact would pass the time in silence. Gu Shengyin returned to her palace. She didn't notice the conflict between God and the Book of Creation at all. The days in heaven were always so beautiful and peaceful. Sometimes, Gu Shengyin felt that there was no difference between living like this for 10,000 years and 1 year. If there had to be a difference, it was because of the position of Dean of the Angel Academy. This mysterious seraph was finally recognized by more angels. Countless little angels were born from the angelic resurrection pool and sent to Angel Academy. They grew up and became subordinates of the 7 blazing angels. Some joined the angel corps, and some chose to become teachers of Angel Academy. When another creation celebration arrived, Her Highness Carrie's reputation in heaven was already close to that of the brilliant morning star, His Highness Lucifer. Gu Shengyin had a feeling that something big was going to happen. Her hunch was very accurate. In the second 100,000 years after her birth, during the second creation celebration, the infernal devils couldn't hold themselves back any longer. The demons attacked heaven, and they chose to attack on the day of the creation celebration. The provocation was self-evident. God was not the only one who was enraged. All of the angels had ugly expressions on their faces. Chapter 1836. All creatures in the world knew that God loved light and hated darkness. And the demons born in the darkness were the creatures that God hated the most. Hell was a place where God's radiance would never cover. However, such actions in hell were naturally not worthy of God's intervention. As the deputy of heaven and the commander-in-chief of the angel corps, Lucifer issued countless orders with a cold face. Gabriel led the archangel corps, Bariel led the archangel corps, and Michael led the archangel corps. They set off directly from the teleportation array on the moon and fought with the demons on the spot. As the commander-in-chief, Lucifer naturally had to go to the battlefield, but he usually did not take action. Instead, he stood on the side of the angel corps. Michael once joked that as long as His Highness Lucifer stood in the Angel Corps, the combat power of the entire Angel Corps would increase by more than 3 levels. Although it was an exaggeration, Lucifer's influence in the entire Angel Corps could be imagined. Out of curiosity, Gu Shengyin took the initiative to follow behind Lucifer. She also wanted to see what the demons who dared to challenge heaven looked like. Then, Gu Shengyin fell silent. With such trash, they actually dared to challenge heaven? Looking at the so-called Demon King, who was almost suppressed by the Angel Corps and forced to flee by Michael's Sword of Judgment, Gu Shengyin deeply felt that Lucifer actually sent out 3 Angel Corps. It was simply an insult to the combat power of the Angel Corps. As if sensing her thoughts, Lucifer smiled. "Do you think the other party is too weak?" Gu Shengyin nodded honestly. Lucifer's pale blue eyes looked at her gently. He shook his head and smiled. "Carrie, you're wrong." Gu Shengyin was a little puzzled. What did he mean? Lucifer turned his head to look at the battlefield in the distance and said softly, "It's not that the demons are too weak, but that the angels are strong enough." His voice was not loud, but Gu Shengyin looked at Lucifer standing in front of her. He stood quietly with 6 glorious wings of holy light hanging behind him. For no reason, he gave off a feeling that made people want to worship him. Gu Shengyin felt a chill in his heart. No wonder so many angels worshipped Lucifer. His personal charm was too strong. It was said that the training program of the Angel Corps was created by Lucifer. The commandments of heaven were also revised by Lucifer. Angel Academy. Even the great cathedral where the gods lived was a blueprint designed by Lucifer. He was like an omnipotent existence. Lucifer had left his shadow in almost every corner of heaven. In the hearts of many angels, compared to the gods who were always shrouded in holy light at the creation ceremony, the noble seraphim His Highness Lucifer was more like their faith. Gu Shengyin thought to herself, "Fortunately, there is no selfishness or evil in the hearts of the angels." Lucifer also believes in God wholeheartedly and can be called the example of the 7 virtues. Otherwise, with heaven's current situation, who knew what would happen? She didn't know that the thing she was worried about would actually come true one day in the distant future. "Your Highness Carrie, be careful." Suddenly, not far away, an angel exclaimed. Gu Shengyin felt a strong wind coming from behind. That strong wind contained an aura that Gu Shengyin hated very much. The power of darkness. 10th update. Today's update is over. Gao Langji will wake up at 6 a.m. tomorrow and take a car to the hospital for a checkup. "It's nothing. My condition hasn't been very good recently. It's just a routine checkup. Don't worry." Then, "I'll pick up my brother. So tomorrow's update will probably be at night, and it will be rather late. Everyone doesn't have to wait for the update. Finally, I'm looking for a wave of votes." Chapter 1837. A bright holy light shone from her body and blocked the attack. When she came back to her senses, Gu Shengyin saw who the attacker was. That person was wearing a black robe and had an arrogant smile on his handsome and evil face. He was looking at Gu Shengyin provocatively and shockingly. Gu Shengyin frowned. Baal. According to her understanding, this person should be one of the great demon kings of hell, Baal. Sin. Greed. Gu Shengyin was standing at the headquarters of the Angel Corps. No one knew what method Baal used to sneak in here. The angels who came back to their senses prepared to attack this demon who had barged into the headquarters of the Angel Corps alone. However, they were stopped by Gu Shengyin. "Don't do it. Let me do it," she said loudly. Baal smirked. "I was curious. What kind of person is the seraph in heaven who has never shown her face?" He looked at Gu Shengyin from head to toe and said teasingly, "Let's not talk about her strength for now. With this appearance, she is even more seductive than the top witches in hell." Clearly, Baal's ability to draw aggro was almost maxed out. He did not restrain his words. Almost all the angels who heard this were unable to restrain their anger. In the hearts of the angels, Her Highness the Seraph was the noblest existence in heaven. How could she be insulted by such a demon? Even Lucifer's expression turned cold. Gu Shangyin, on the other hand, seemed to be the calmest one. She was not angry at Baal's words at all. Hearing Baal's words that were almost malicious, Gu Shangyin only smiled faintly and said loudly, "I will soon let you know that the identity of a seraph is not obtained by relying on one's face." As she spoke, she rose into the sky. Baal's eyes flashed with fighting spirit and he also rose into the sky. Gu Shangyin did not want the aftermath of the battle to affect the angel corps. On the other hand, Ba didn't want to have to pay attention to the angel's sneak attacks while he was in battle. Holy light flashed in Gu Shangyin's hand, and a pure white sword of light formed from the power of living beings appeared in her hand. Seeing her like this, Baal still had the mood to talk. "Why aren't you like those angels? You don't even have wings." Before he could finish his words, he retreated quickly and narrowly dodged a sword ray from his opponent. Gu Shangyin looked at him indifferently. "Instead of worrying about this, why don't you think about how to survive from my hands later?" "How arrogant!" Ba's eyes lit up. He liked this kind of arrogant personality, especially when the other party had a face that suited his taste. He teased, "So confident? The beauty's name is Carrie, right? Why don't we make a bet? If I win, Carrie will fall into hell and become my demon queen. What do you think?" Gu Shangyin curled her lips into a smile. Her answer was a sword light that could split the moon's sky. Lady Carrie's strength. Gabriel had unknowingly stopped fighting and turned to stand beside Lucifer. They looked up at the battle in the sky together. No, rather than a battle, it was a one-sided beating. Baal, who was known as the #1 demon king of hell, Baal self-proclaimed, was completely suppressed by Carrie. He could not fight back at all. Chapter 1838. Furthermore, the angels could clearly see that Carrie had not used her full strength at all. Lucifer smiled. "I really didn't expect this. Even I want to spar with Carrie." Gabriel looked at the yearning expression on Lucifer's face and her heart tightened. She recalled His Highness Lucifer's terrifying strength, then looked at Her Highness Carrie's current display of strength. Gabriel felt that if the two of them really wanted to spar, they must not do it in her moon sky. The moon sky would not be able to withstand it. Gabriel and Lucifer chatted for a while and then saw that Gu Shangyin in the air seemed to be a little impatient. In fact, she was. Gu Shangyin felt that she had beaten enough people up. She shook her hand and raised it again. Ba was shocked to find that the sword light opposite him was at least a few levels stronger than the previous attack in terms of speed and power. An unprecedented sense of danger came over him and Ba quickly retreated. However, it was too late. The demons who were fighting with the angel army suddenly realized that something had fallen from the sky and smashed a deep hole in the ground. The angels and demons retreated one after another until the dust settled again. When they saw clearly what was in the deep hole, there was a sudden commotion on the demons' side. Who else could it be other than their Lord Bar? He was wearing a flashy black robe, and his handsome face was covered in dust. He also had 2 horns on his head. There was a bone-deep wound that started from Bar's left shoulder and went straight down to his right waist. Judging from the depth of the wound, if Bar had retreated a little slower, he would have been cut in half by Gu Shangyin's sword. An ordinary human or demon would have died from such a wound. However, Bar was a king-level demon after all. At this moment, he could only grit his teeth and suck in cold air. In a moment of carelessness, he met Gu Shangyin's cold eyes in midair, and he couldn't help but shudder. He would never forget that intense feeling of brushing shoulders with death. Of course, he was also traumatized by Gu Shangyin, who made him feel this way. As expected, the angels of heaven, were their looks equal to their strength? Ba thought as he grimaced. Gu Shangyin landed beside Lucifer under the admiring gazes of the angels. At that time, she really wanted to give Ba another stab. Letting a tiger return to the mountain was not her style. But just as she was about to make a move, a huge binding force came from the void, restricting her movements. It was during this opening that Bar managed to escape with his life. That strange power seemed to have only been there to stop her from killing Bar. After confirming that she no longer wanted to kill him, it withdrew. What did that mean? Gu Shangyin was a little confused. Logically speaking, In this world, the only ones who could have such power to imprison him could only be the gods. But just now, Gu Shengyin was sure that God didn't do anything. What kind of existence was secretly protecting the demons? For the first time, Gu Shengyin understood why the difference between heaven and hell was so big, but the king-level demons of hell had never had an accident. Lucifer looked at her expression and suddenly asked, "Did you notice it too, Carrie?" Chapter 1839. Gu Shengyin's heart skipped a beat. The next moment, Lucifer's voice sounded directly in her mind, "There's no way to kill a king-level demon. You noticed it just now, right?" Gu Shengyin's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, she wasn't the only one who encountered such a situation. She heard Lucifer's telepathic communication with her and knew that he probably didn't want too many angels to know. After all, there was a powerful existence secretly protecting the demon race. If such a truth was exposed, it would be a huge blow to the angels. For the angels who received light education from a young age, the most disgusting thing in this world was the power of darkness. And demons were undoubtedly the creatures with the most concentrated power of darkness and filth. They were the complete opposite of the radiant and holy angels. They were natural opponents. Gu Shengyin quickly asked, "Your Highness Lucifer, you noticed it too, right? Do you know what this situation is?" To Gu Shengyin's surprise, Lucifer just shook his head. "When I first fought with the demons, I noticed this. After that, I even asked my God personally," Lucifer said. Gu Shengyin looked at him curiously. God should know the reason. Lucifer met her gaze and just shook his head. "Carrie, you can only ask my God personally for the answer to this matter. I can't say." Seeing Lucifer's determined expression, Gu Shengyin also knew that she probably couldn't get an answer from him. If the Archangel was unwilling to say, no one could do anything. Gu Shengyin secretly sighed and planned to ask her God personally after this holy war ended. This holy war ended unexpectedly quickly. The result was naturally hell's defeat. While the entire heaven was celebrating, Gu Shengyin came to the great cathedral alone. My God! She knelt down and prayed to the figure on the throne. "Carrie, why did you come here at this time?" The high and mighty God opened his indifferent eyes and quietly looked down at his favorite archangel. Gu Shengyin closed her eyes. She passed her question to the God in the form of prayer. The God's eyes suddenly darkened. The great cathedral was silent for a moment. Then, Gu Shengyin heard the God's low sigh. "The gap between light and darkness is getting bigger and bigger. Heaven is getting stronger and stronger while hell is getting weaker and weaker. There are already fewer king-level demons than archangels. We can't lose any more." Gu Shengyin was surprised. She couldn't help but ask, "So, God, at that time, it was you who stopped me?" The God shook his head. "It wasn't me, it was the remnant will of chaos." He didn't seem to mind complaining about his helplessness in front of his beloved blazing angel. There has always been a remnant will in the darkness of chaos. After this world was created, it was integrated into the world's laws. It's chaos and treats light and darkness equally. It has always been very dissatisfied with my preference for light. The God didn't feel uncomfortable at all when talking about this. Gu Shengyin voiced her guess. "So, the entire world's will is protecting the darkness?" The God nodded. "You can understand it that way. It's midnight first." Chapter 1840. Gu Shengyin had never thought that he would hear such words from the mouth of a god. The creator of this world was the God of light. Of course, he preferred light and hated darkness. And those who believed in God, whether angels, humans, or elves, they were all races that loved light. Hell, which gathered the power of darkness, had no way to compete with heaven. The darkness of this world, compared to the light, was too weak. She used to believe in God wholeheartedly and never had any other thoughts, so she never considered this problem. This was the first time Gu Shengyin faced the problem of light and darkness. But God obviously didn't want to talk to her about this. "Carrie, if there's nothing else, you can leave." Gu Shengyin couldn't help but look up. She wanted to see God's expression at this moment, but the thick holy light blocked her sight. She could only get up and leave, returning to her own palace. A long time after Gu Shengyin left, the Book of Creation, which had been lying quietly on God's knee, suddenly floated up. God. The Book of Creation's voice sounded. The imbalance between light and darkness is getting worse. You should think of a solution. God closed his eyes. This obvious avoidance made the Book of Creation a bit anxious. It's true that you hate darkness, but God, you know very well that if this continues, there will be big problems, God said calmly. God coldly said, but I am a light element God's spirit. I cannot protect hell. The Book of Creation was speechless. God was right. From the moment God was born from chaos and darkness and determined to be pure light, he was destined to prefer light. This was unsolvable. The Book of Creation fell silent. After a long time, God's indifferent voice sounded in the great cathedral. I will think of a solution. But before God could think of a solution, the will of chaos acted first. She found Gu Shengyin. Gu Shengyin had a dream. For hundreds of thousands of years, except for a few times, as a powerful seraph, Gu Shengyin had never had a dream. She dreamt that she had arrived in a strange space. It was empty and quiet. She couldn't see the end or the end. However, it made people feel very peaceful. Suddenly, a woman in black appeared in front of Gu Shengyin. What surprised her was that other than her black hair and black eyes, this woman was exactly the same as her. Who are you? Gu Shengyin asked. She could feel that this woman was very powerful and had no ill intentions towards her. The black-robed woman looked at her with a smile. Who am I? Feel it. Gu Shengyin closed her eyes. She could feel a very intimate aura from the woman. This feeling. She suddenly opened her eyes. You are the will of the world, or should I call you chaos darkness? The woman was still smiling, and her voice was very gentle. There's no difference. Gu Shengyin didn't have any ill feelings towards this world's previous incarnation. She asked, why did you suddenly appear in my dream? The chaotic darkness looked at her with a mysterious smile on its face. Let me return you the identity you should have. Gu Shengyin had a bad feeling. What do you mean? 4 chapters today. I'm so tired. I won't update today. In the next few days, I'll make up for the 4 chapters 1-0. Good night, everyone. Chapter 1841. Gu Shengyin's heart trembled. She had always known that she was different from the other seraphs. Chaotic darkness looked at her and smiled. It seems that you also know something. Gu Shengyin didn't say anything. Chaotic darkness looked at her with a gentle gaze. Carrie, you should be my child. Gu Shengyin looked up at her. Chaotic darkness' gaze seemed to contain countless things. She sighed. When God created all things in the world, as chaotic darkness, my mission in this world had already ended. But when I saw God's light attribute, I had a bad feeling in my heart. Chaotic darkness didn't have any negative emotions when talking about God's gaze. She was like a mother who could tolerate everything, slowly recounting the events of the past. The God of creation shouldn't have such an obvious attribute deviation. As the only God in this world, he should have universal love, but he couldn't do it. The 7 days of creation ended. When my consciousness was about to enter the world's law, I seemed to have seen the future of this world. Gu Shengyin couldn't help but look at chaotic darkness. Chaotic darkness softly said a few words. Light and darkness are out of balance. The world will collapse. Gu Shengyin's heart trembled. She wanted to tell herself that this was all fake, that this strange woman who looked exactly like her was lying to her. But her reason told her that chaotic darkness wasn't wrong. The light and darkness of this world was indeed out of balance. Especially, under God's intentional or unintentional connivance, this imbalance and the gap continued to widen. If this situation continued, chaotic darkness words weren't completely alarmist. Gu Shengyin thought so in her heart, but didn't show any emotion on her face. Chaotic darkness couldn't see what she was thinking, so she could only continue. You should know that 7 is the limit. In this heaven, there should only be 7 seraphs. You are the extra 1 inch. Gu Shengyin finally responded. So? Chaotic Darkness said. So, Carrie, you are not a seraph created by God, but the last gift I, Chaotic Darkness, left to this world before I merged with the world's law. Gu Shengyin's heart trembled. Her heart was in a mess. Chaos Darkness stopped talking after saying that. She was not in a hurry to wait for Gu Shengyin's reply. Gu Shengyin was silent for a long time before she suddenly asked, So what are you here for? What do you mean by returning something that belongs to me? Chaos Darkness smiled when he heard that. In her opinion, when Carrie asked this question, it meant that her heart had been shaken. She said, Naturally, I want you to return to where you belong. She looked into the endless void space, unable to see the end. Carrie, you know about hell, right? That's where you should be. You were born to be the king of hell, not to stay in heaven and be an awkward seraph. After she finished speaking, she looked at Gu Shengyin expectantly. Gu Shengyin's lips curled into a smile. She looked at the darkness of chaos and spoke word by word, You're lying. Chaotic Darkness was stunned. Gu Shengyin said calmly, Maybe it's true that the light and darkness are out of balance, and maybe it's true that I'm not created by God. But Chaotic Darkness, was I really created by you? Chapter 1842. She pointed at herself and said calmly, If I was really created by you, Chaotic Darkness, then how do you explain my strong light attribute? Chaotic Darkness was speechless. She obviously didn't expect Carrie to be able to think so calmly after hearing such shocking news. Gu Shengyin was right. If the 8th seraph was created by Chaotic Darkness, then when she was just born, Chaotic Darkness would have given her the dark attribute for the balance of light and darkness that she spoke of. In that case, Carrie couldn't have stayed in heaven, let alone become the 8th seraph of heaven. Seeing that his lie was exposed, Chaos Darkness sighed. You're very smart, Carrie. Gu Shengyin didn't take this compliment to heart. She opened her mouth and said, Then, can we communicate openly now? Chaotic Darkness put away the smile on her face and her expression became very serious. She said, Then I'll tell you my purpose directly. Carrie, you need to fall. Gu Shengyin widened her eyes in surprise as if she had heard a very funny joke. The Chaos Darkness said to itself, I watched the birth of this world. I can't just watch it decline and die. God rejects darkness, but I. Chaotic Darkness. A cold snort suddenly sounded in this quiet space. Gu Shengyin felt her mind shake. She saw the black-robed woman in front of her turn into pieces with a cold snort and disappear without a trace. She suddenly opened her eyes. Gu Shengyin stood up from the couch. God's voice sounded in her mind, Carrie, come to the great cathedral. Gu Shengyin obediently changed her clothes and came to the great cathedral. God was still sitting on the throne. Almost every time Gu Shengyin came to the great cathedral, she would see such a scene. God opened his eyes and looked at the seraph standing respectfully at the bottom of the stairs. He was a bit angry, but not at Carrie, but at Chaotic Darkness. God did not expect that Chaos Darkness would target Jialia. Suddenly, Shen Tian paused. A fragmented memory appeared in his mind. It was Gu Shengyin who took the initiative to open her mind and spread out the memory in front of God. Such a frank and unreserved action warmed Deity's eyes. You don't have to mind the words of chaos and darkness, he said to Gu Shengyin. Gu Shengyin asked doubtfully, but God? She wanted to say that the words of the chaos darkness were not all alarmist. But God interrupted her. I'll take care of it. Gu Shengyin obediently lowered her head. Yes, my God. God continued to say, Don't worry. She won't have a chance to touch you again. This time, Chaos Darkness relied on the fact that it was now a part of the world's laws to take advantage of this loophole. After Deity came to his senses, he would never give her another chance. After Gu Shengyin left, the Book of Creation asked worriedly, God, have you really found a solution? Deity replied, No. The Book of Creation was speechless. God closed his eyes. Carry alone is not enough to maintain the balance of light and darkness. And he wouldn't let Carry fall. 2 more. 8 more. Chapter 1843. Just as God had said, from then on, Gu Shengyin never saw the chaos darkness again. Just like that, the days passed peacefully. Ordinary angels couldn't sense it, but a seraph like Gu Shengyin could. Heaven was as peaceful as before, but natural disasters started to appear frequently in the human world. Hell was also said to be restless. God summoned seraphs less and less. This was very rare. God spent most of his time alone in the Holy Church. Other than the seraphs, he almost never summoned other angels. But there was a big difference between rarely and almost never. All the creatures in heaven knew that God loved His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Carrie the most. But Lucifer hadn't seen God in months. Carrie was in the same situation. The seraphs were worried. Although it was said that in their hearts, God was omnipotent and it was impossible for anything unexpected to happen, this situation was still very worrying. Lucifer gathered the other 7 seraphs for a short meeting. Lucifer frowned. "I'm worried," he said. He looked at Carrie. "Carrie, you're the closest to God. Have you found anything?" Gu Shengyin shook her head. Actually, the seraphs all knew that no matter if there was a problem or not, if God didn't want others to know, then no one would know anything. Gu Shengyin actually had some guesses. It probably had something to do with the balance of light and dark. She guessed correctly. Right now, in the Holy Church, the thick Holy Spirit power was growing at a terrifying speed. God was still sitting on the throne. But if someone could see through the holy light and look at him, they would see that God was clenching his hands tightly. The Book of Creation's worried voice came from within. "God, are you okay?" No one answered. After a long time, God's indifferent voice slowly sounded from the Holy Church. "I'm fine." God opened his eyes. "Book of Creation, is it okay?" The Book of Creation suddenly flew into the air and floated in the air. At the same time, the pages of his book flipped rapidly, and one scene after another was reflected in his eyes. God looked on expressionlessly until the pages of the Book of Creation finally stopped flipping. The great cathedral fell into silence. After a long while, the Book of Creation's voice sounded again. How could this be? God used his great power and forcefully used the Book of Creation as a medium to find a way to maintain the balance between light and darkness. In a sense, they had succeeded. This was because the Book of Creation really did reveal the solution. But the way to solve it, both the gods and the Book of Creation found it hard to accept. Deity closed his eyes. Try again. The Book of Creation didn't say anything. Even a god of creation would have to expend a great deal of divine power to unleash such a heaven-defying divine ability. God obviously did not want to believe in that future, or rather, he wanted to find another way. But the result was still the same. The great cathedral fell into silence once more. God. A gentle female voice suddenly sounded in this space. Deity opened his eyes. Chaos darkness. What's the mission in this world? The system replied, due to a teleportation error, the host has become an existence that should not have been born. The mission objective of this world is Judgment result. Prevent Carrie from falling. Never fall from heaven? Gu Shengyin was baffled. Based on her current situation, the possibility of her falling from the sky was extremely small. 4 watches. The night continued. Chapter 1845. Unless, Gu Shengyin once again guessed about the balance between light and dark. She had some vague guesses about this, but she wasn't sure. After thinking for a while, Gu Shengyin suddenly asked, "System, is there an original plot in this world?" The system shook its head. Gu Shengyin asked again, "What about skill extraction?" The system continued to shake its head. Due to the failure of the teleportation in this world, the host doesn't have the skill extraction. Gu Shengyin was speechless. So what should she do? The system continued, I can't appear frequently in this world. The God of creation is too powerful. I'm afraid that he can detect my presence. Gu Shengyin nodded in understanding. After a few words with Gu Shengyin, the system returned to its silent state. Gu Shengyin stayed alone in the palace for a while. She decided to gain God's favor. Although she was very sure that compared to the other creatures in this world, her presence was already strong enough. But who knew what would happen next? The system gave her the mission of not falling from heaven. Gu Shengyin had a feeling that things weren't that simple. Angels falling from heaven mostly happened because they violated the rules of heaven. Their souls were polluted and they couldn't stay in heaven anymore. Falling from heaven like this was mostly chosen by the angels themselves. Then, were there any who were forced to fall from heaven? Gu Shengyin thought to herself. She came to the door of the great sanctuary. God, she called out in a low voice. Carrie. God looked at the silver-haired seraph in confusion. Her face was still beautiful, but her expression seemed to be shrouded in a thin layer of blankness. It was rare to see Carrie like this. Gu Shengyin walked straight to the throne. God didn't stop her. Gu Shengyin walked to the throne with familiarity. Just like in the past, she bent her knees and rested her head on the god's knee. It was a very dependent and fragile posture. God, I'm very lost, she said in a low voice. Deity's gaze fell on her long silver hair. She wore a hair accessory that symbolized her status as a seraph. It was an exquisite gemstone hair chain, but it wasn't as dazzling as Carrie's. Deity did not speak. He waited for Gu Shengyin to continue. I don't know what I'm afraid of, but this place has always been very scary. She pressed against her heart. His head felt warm. Gu Shengyin raised her head in surprise. It was God who stroked the top of her head. God looked down at her and said, Don't worry, Carrie. I'm here. It was only a simple sentence, but Gu Shengyin smiled as if she had received a strong guarantee. She closed her eyes quietly. Being by God's side always gave her extra peace of mind. He actually fell asleep? A low voice rang out from the great cathedral. God didn't seem to think that an angel would fall asleep in front of him. He lowered his head and looked at half of Carrie's face that was exposed. Her calm expression was full of peace and trust. God looked at her face and was in a daze for a moment. Then he moved his fingers and prepared to put her somewhere else. But before he moved, the figure on his knee suddenly called out in a low voice, God. God waited for a moment, but he didn't hear anything else. Then he realized that she was just talking in her sleep. He was in Carrie's dream. This realization put the divinity in a good mood. Chapter 1846. But what happened next was beyond God's expectation. God moved his fingers, wanting to move Carrie to another place to rest. But before he could do anything, Carrie suddenly reached out and hugged his waist. God's body stiffened for a moment. It had been countless years since God was born. He had never had such an intimate moment with any creature. Even though this intimate partner was Carrie, whom he had always liked, God still felt very unnatural. He subconsciously wanted to pull Gu Shengyin's hand away. But Carrie was faster than him. The seraph, who was still in a sweet dream, leaned against God tightly. Her hands were around his waist, and the corners of her mouth were curled up. Obviously, the scene in the dream made her very happy. God lowered his head and looked at Carrie. His heart suddenly moved, and he stopped struggling. He moved his consciousness, and then he appeared in a bright sunshine. God looked around. This place was covered with green grass, blue sky, and white clouds. It looked like the human world. Carrie liked the human world? She had never been to the human world, had she? God was a little confused. This was Carrie's dream. When he was about to pull Carrie away, God suddenly changed his mind. He suddenly wanted to see what the dream looked like that could make Carrie smile so satisfactorily. The scene not far away attracted his attention. The two tall figures were walking slowly on the grass, hand in hand. God moved his consciousness, and then he appeared in front of the two figures. With just one glance, he was shocked. The one on the right with silver eyes and silver hair, smiling happily, was none other than Carrie. God had never seen such a bright smile on Carrie's face. In God's eyes, seraphs should be perfect. So Carrie had always been reserved and polite in heaven. She always had a perfect smile on her face. God used to like that smile, but seeing Carrie like this, God realized that Carrie could be so happy. This lively Carrie was more real than the perfect seraph in heaven. And the figure on the left, God's eyes darkened. The man with silver hair down to his ankles and indifferent golden eyes. God had seen that face for countless years. It was impossible for him to be wrong. That was himself. Carrie was the only seraph who had seen the true appearance of the gods through the holy light. Staring at their interlocked hands, Shen Luo saw the tenderness and attachment in Carrie's eyes when she looked at him. He felt as if he had discovered something that he had never noticed before. Heaven forbade desires, and he had never thought about that. Since when did Carrie have such thoughts about me? God felt that he should be angry. He should be angry because he had been blasphemed. He should punish Carrie, who dared to dream of being God, and not let her off easily. But no. He was just shocked and intrigued. But there was no disgust or revulsion. Deity stared blankly at the two figures walking towards the setting sun, getting further and further away. He was silent for a moment, and his figure gradually turned into a shadow. At the same time, the god on the throne opened his eyes. Carrie was still fast asleep. A satisfied and happy smile still hung on her face. The god spirit looked at her with a complicated expression. Many emotions flashed through his golden eyes. In the end, he gently moved his hand and placed her on a soft couch in the great sage hall. Today's 6th update. There were 4 more updates in the evening. Please give me a ticket, a wood. Chapter 1847. At that time, Gu Shengyin had no idea that her dream had been accidentally spied on by God. She was immersed in her beautiful dream. Speaking of which, the God of creation in this world had a divine body made of the purest light element in the world. No matter how one looked at it, it was perfect. Gu Shengyin looked at the expressionless God beside her. While she was satisfied with her sight, she sighed with emotion. Even in the dream, God had such a cold and unapproachable appearance. It was really it was hard to explain. She slept very well. The power of the Holy Spirit in the great cathedral was very strong. Ordinary gods and even seraphs might not be able to withstand it. But Gu Shengyin didn't feel anything at all. If one could withstand the power of the Holy Spirit, then the benefits one could enjoy would naturally be top-notch. Gu Shengyin felt that she was in a warm environment. It was as if she was lying in soft clouds. It made her want to sink into a sweeter dream. Fortunately, she still had a bit of reason. She finally remembered where she was. Gu Shengyin opened her eyes and looked around. This place was very familiar. In fact, after staying in Crystal Sky for hundreds of thousands of years, Gu Shengyin didn't know how many times she had come to the great cathedral. Of course, she was very familiar with all the decorations. She looked around and finally realized that she was in a side hall of the great sage hall. So, she had fallen asleep while chatting with God? God didn't wake her up and sent her to rest on a soft couch? Gu Shengyin didn't know what to think. She pursed her lips and smiled. She got up, tidied herself up, and walked toward the great cathedral. Sure enough, God still maintained the same posture, sitting on the throne. Gu Shengyin bowed her head and was a bit embarrassed. God, I was rude. She was talking about how she had fallen asleep in front of God. God's voice didn't sound strange at all. It's okay. Go and rest well. This probably meant that God didn't want to chat with her for the time being. Gu Shengyin quietly bowed to God and left the great sage hall. As soon as Gu Shengyin's figure disappeared, the Book of Creation flew up impatiently. God, what do you plan to do with Princess Carrie? As the accompanying artifact of the gods, The Book of Creation could see everything that the gods could see. In other words, the Book of Creation had seen Gu Shengyin's dream clearly. The Book of Creation understood God very well. It knew that God would not tolerate such things, so it asked. God was at a loss for words. He was stumped by the Book of Creation. To be honest, when God realized that Carrie had unusual feelings for him, he did not want to respond. He even pretended that nothing had happened so that Carrie would not panic. It had never occurred to him to punish Carrie for this. It wasn't until the Book of Creation asked this question that he reacted. Why was he so tolerant of Carrie? Was it because she was a seraph? But if it was someone else and he knew that Meta or Gabriel had such feelings for him, what would he do? God thought carefully. He was sure that if he knew that other angels had such feelings for him, he would erase their emotions and memories without hesitation, even if they were seraphs. Chapter 1848. In the end, Carrie was different to him. God stared at the space in front of him, lost in thought. The Book of Creation didn't get an answer. It stopped in the air, confused. It didn't understand. Was it difficult to answer the question it asked? God? It asked tentatively. God came back to his senses and said quietly, I won't see Carrie for a while. She's just lost. She'll come to her senses after the baptism of time. The Book of Creation was speechless. That was it. Was the difference in treatment so obvious? The Book of Creation thought carefully and felt that there was something wrong with God's attitude. Compared to God's usual style, the difference was too obvious. The Book of Creation often saw things in the human world. The more it thought about it, the more it felt that God was a bit abnormal with Carrie. It asked cautiously, God, what do you think of Her Highness Carrie? God looked at it with indifferent golden eyes. What do you mean? He was impatient with this roundabout conversation. Seeing this, the Book of Creation went straight to the point. Don't you think that your attitude towards Her Highness Kalia is very strange? God, do you like Her Highness Carrie? God was speechless. He said coldly, I was born with a body of light. How can I have such a thing as desire? Book of Creation, have you been too idle recently? Is that why you're thinking about these things? The Book of Creation was speechless. Don't try to change the topic. I feel that your words have a hint of anger. But the Book of Creation didn't dare to say this. It closed its mouth, but it complained silently in its heart. It's fine if you don't admit it, but you're avoiding it. The Book of Creation could show all kinds of things in the world. In terms of theoretical knowledge, it could kill any existence in the world. No matter how it looked at it, it felt that God's reaction was very strange. It was like he was in love without knowing it. It wanted to remind God, but God seemed to dislike this topic. They couldn't communicate at all. So the Book of Creation had to give up. But anyway, you have enough time. If you want to avoid it, then so be it. The Book of Creation cursed silently, then closed its mouth and stopped talking. Gu Shengyin returned to her palace. She didn't think there was anything wrong with it. But soon, she realized that something was wrong. Under normal circumstances, the gods would summon her once every month. This was the first time after the creation celebration. In the 100,000 years since Gu Shengyin was born, she spent at least half of her time in the great cathedral accompanying the gods. Because at that time, she did not have a priesthood. But now, it had been half a year since he last saw a god. She never received another summons from the gods again. This was very wrong. Could it be that God is angry because I slept last time? Gu Shengyin shook her head. No, God would not be angry because of this. Even if he did, he would show it on the spot. Then, what had happened? Gu Shengyin couldn't figure it out. She decided to personally go to the Great Sage Hall and seek an audience with the gods. He went as he pleased. Gu Shengyin walked directly to the entrance of the Great Sage Hall. My God, Carrie requests an audience, she said softly. If God was willing to see her, she would naturally receive the message. If he wasn't, there was no response from the Great Sage Hall for a long time. 8 chapters. 2 chapters left. See you later, please vote, vote. Chapter 1849. Gu Shengyin stood at the door of the cathedral for a long time. This was the first time she'd been rejected by God. In the quiet great sage hall, the Book of Creation watched as the silver figure left in loneliness and sighed. God, do you really not want to see Princess Carrie? God's faint voice sounded. Wait until she gives up the thoughts she shouldn't have in her heart. The Book of Creation was speechless. Okay, as long as you're happy. Actually, Gu Shengyin wasn't as lonely as the Book of Creation imagined. She was just a bit confused. What had happened? Why did God suddenly not want to see her? It was the complete opposite of God's attitude toward Carrie. God continued to summon Lucifer at the usual frequency. In the eyes of the other angels, this phenomenon was that God was favoring His Highness Lucifer more and more, while His Highness Carrie was no longer as favored as before. During one of the seraphs' regular meetings, Gabriel asked Gu Shengyin worriedly if she'd done something to make God unhappy. Gu Shengyin was completely confused. She said hesitantly, "Last time, when I met God, I fell asleep. Does that count?" Gabriel was speechless. "Yes, Princess Carrie, you're really amazing." When they met God, they were all very nervous and excited. They had to maintain their best manners at all times. This princess actually fell asleep. However, Gabriel thought about it and felt that with God's love for Princess Carrie, He wouldn't be angry over such a small thing, right? She looked at Gu Shengyin helplessly. "I don't know either. Think about it carefully." After that, Gu Shengyin tried to go to the cathedral a few times, but every time, she was rejected by God. The most depressing thing was that once, she stood outside and watched Lucifer walk into the cathedral. After returning to her palace, Gu Shengyin asked the system gloomily, "Did I do something to make God hate me?" The system's white light flashed, indicating that it didn't know either. Gu Shengyin was still thinking seriously when Lucifer arrived. He had clearly just come out of the great cathedral, and there was a Holy Spirit energy that Gu Shengyin couldn't be more familiar with. He looked at Gu Shengyin's face with obvious worry. "Jia Lian." Gu Shengyin bowed to him. "Your Highness." Lucifer looked at her and hesitated. He had only vaguely heard that Carrie had not been summoned by God recently. But he never thought that things would be this serious. Not being summoned by the gods and being rejected were two completely different concepts. Before Lucifer left, he even took the initiative to say, "God, I think I saw Carrie outside the great cathedral." However, the gods did not reply to him. Lucifer felt that the gods did not seem to be angry or disgusted with Carrie, so it was very strange. Gu Shengyin knew what he wanted to ask. She smiled bitterly and shook her head. "I also don't know how I angered God." In other words, she also didn't understand anything. She looked at Lucifer and suddenly said, "Your Highness, can I ask for leave?" Lucifer looked at her in confusion. Gu Shengyin said, "Since I was born, I have never left heaven. Can I go to the human world?" Chapter 1850. Lucifer glanced at Gu Shengyin. There was no special expression on this companion's face, but Lucifer automatically imagined her sad face because of God's reaction. It was good to go and relax. Lucifer thought for a moment and felt that there was no special problem for Carrie to deal with at Angel Academy, so he nodded immediately. "No problem, you can play for a while." Gu Shengyin laughed. She was really curious about the human world in this world. This was a world where everyone believed in God. There were elves, dragons, and strange beasts in the human world. It should be a completely different scene from heaven. She stepped out of the moon through the transmission array. It was the first time she left heaven. Gu Shengyin stood in the void, looking at the holy gate of heaven with a slight smile on her face. Then she flew quickly toward the human world. In the great sage hall, a god and a book both saw this scene. The Book of Creation said, "Her Highness Carrie has gone to the human world." God didn't have any reaction. With Carrie's strength, There was nothing in the world that could hurt her. As Deity thought about this, he suddenly realized something. He wanted to distance himself from Carrie. Why couldn't he help but focus on her as soon as she left his sight? God's heart skipped a beat. He lowered his eyes and withdrew his gaze from Gu Shengyin. He had to get rid of this habit. Gu Shengyin landed in the wilderness. She used her divine sense, and the scene within a radius of 10,000 miles appeared in front of her. The next moment, she moved her feet and appeared thousands of miles away. This was a human city. Compared to heaven, which was exquisite everywhere, this city was so simple and crude that it was terrible. However, it was this imperfection that gave the city a sense of liveliness. Gu Shengyin walked into the city. There were many people in the city. Women with cloth wrapped around their heads walked hurriedly on the streets. Many young and old men were hawking on the streets. In front of them were simple handicrafts made by themselves. Gu Shengyin's arrival attracted almost everyone's attention. Even in heaven, which was full of beauties, only Lucifer could compare to Carrie's beauty, let alone in the mortal world. There was a strange silence on the street. Everyone seemed to be worshipping Gu Shengyin as she walked through the bustling street. Soon, they came to their senses. Then, Gu Shengyin found that the people here were too enthusiastic. The women wearing thick headscarves took off the beads on their wrists and handed them to her. The men handed over their most exquisite trinkets to her. Even the children carefully opened their hands to give her candies that they had treasured for a long time. Gu Shengyin was stunned for a moment. She had never thought that she would be so welcomed. Was it just because he was good-looking? She thought it was funny. But soon, she felt that it was a little troublesome. Because she realized that her arrival seemed to have affected the normal lives of these humans. Gu Shengyin thought for a moment and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Her figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. Those humans were looking at her with admiration. Now that she suddenly disappeared, they were so excited that they shouted loudly. Some of the older people even knelt on the ground. In this era where the belief of the gods was strong, messengers of the gods were not rare in the mortal world. Obviously, these humans regarded Gu Shengyin as the messenger of the gospel. Update 10. Today's update is over. If there is time tomorrow, I will continue to update 10,000 times to make up for what I owe. Good night, everyone. Love you. At the same time, I would also like to ask for some tickets. Speaking of which, do the students have a holiday during the weekend? Chapter 1851. Gu Shengyin looked at this scene from afar and waved her hand. A rain of holy light fell from the sky and landed on the humans. Many of them felt refreshed and the impurities in their bodies disappeared without a trace. Seeing this scene, they were even more convinced that the celestial-like person they saw just now was really an emissary sent by God. Gu Shengyin turned around and planned to leave. She realized that her appearance was not suitable to appear in an ordinary human gathering place. In the next second, her movements paused. The scene in front of her suddenly changed. The plains disappeared, the trees disappeared, and the road under her feet also disappeared. The entire space turned into a thick black color. And Gu Shengyin was the only ray of light in this thick darkness. Her expression did not change as she said coldly, "Chaotic darkness?" Other than chaotic darkness, she could not think of anyone else who could pull her into this foreign domain without her knowing. A soft laugh sounded. A familiar black figure appeared in front of Gu Shengyin. "Long time no see, Carrie." The black-robed woman who looked exactly like Carrie said with a smile. Gu Shengyin tried to break free from this domain but helplessly found that it was useless. Chaotic darkness seemed to have discovered her purpose. She did not stop her and only said with a smile, "It's useless. This is something I prepared especially for you. Carrie, I have waited for so long. The day when you are not in the crystal sky has finally come. What's more perfect is that God's gaze does not fall on you." Gu Shengyin gave up on the idea of breaking through. She looked at chaotic darkness seriously and asked, "What do you want to do?" It seemed that chaotic darkness had been planning this for a long time. Chaotic darkness did not hide her purpose. "Of course I want to become one with you." Chaotic darkness, as the name implied, was the source of darkness. If Gu Shengyin really became one with her, her light attribute would definitely be devoured by the darkness. At that time, heaven would no longer be able to contain her. Could this be the reason why the system gave her the mission of not falling from the sky? As long as an angel was tainted by the power of darkness and evil, their core would mutate and their faith would be shaken. That was the beginning of their downfall. Seeing the obvious resistance on Gu Shengyin's face, Chaos Darkness was somewhat puzzled. "You seem very reluctant. So why not?" Chaotic Darkness said, "If you choose to fuse with me, with your strength and my attributes, the newly born Carrie will definitely be the most powerful king of darkness. No one can restrain you anymore, and God can't command you anymore. Isn't it much better than being a boring seraph in heaven?" Gu Shengyin lowered her eyes. "I was born with light, and there is only light in my heart." The Chaos Darkness stopped talking. In fact, she had seen the angel's firm belief in the light and the gods. She didn't understand at all what kind of thing faith was to make them so persistent. She felt that she and Carrie were at odds on these matters. Since that was the case, there was no need to continue the conversation. Since they couldn't reach a consensus, it was better to use their actions directly. The thick darkness pressed down on Gu Shengyin. Gu Shengyin's body lit up with a dazzling light, forcing the darkness back. Chaotic Darkness was surprised. There's actually such a powerful force. Chapter 1852. This was the first time Gu Shengyin had fully displayed her power. Chaotic Darkness was also shocked. But she was prepared. From the beginning, she had considered Gu Shengyin's power in the best possible way. Now, although the power Gu Shengyin had displayed was beyond Chaotic Darkness' expectations, it was still within her control. Gu Shengyin watched as the dark power slowly invaded her body. Pain. Extreme pain. Although her body was not a real seraph, it had been bathed in the light attribute since birth. After hundreds of thousands of years, under the baptism of the powerful Holy Spirit of the great cathedral, her body was almost comparable to a natural body of light. How did it feel to have a pure body of light forcefully invaded by darkness? Gu Shengyin felt as if her body had become a battlefield. The dark power from the outside world and the light power in her body were fiercely fighting against each other. So tenacious? Chaotic Darkness looked at Gu Shengyin's body, which was so pale that it was almost transparent because of the pain, and a trace of confusion flashed through its dark eyes. Was it because of that strange belief again? She would rather endure such great pain than fall into depravity? System. Gu Shengyin gritted her teeth to maintain her clarity. "I can't hold on any longer." Her tone was a little difficult. "Tell me, what can I do to not fall?" The system's body flashed with white light. "Maintain your clarity. As long as your core is not contaminated, no matter what happens, you will not fall. As long as your core is pure, even if your body is burned by the light power, you will have a way to return to normal when you return to heaven." Gu Shengyin understood the system's meaning. Maintaining the purity of the core was to maintain absolute clarity in such extreme pain. Because once there was a flaw in her consciousness, she could be taken advantage of by Chaotic Darkness. Cold sweat dripped from the corner of her forehead. She could already feel the taste of blood between her lips and teeth. Gu Shengyin could clearly feel that her body was being burned inch by the dark power. In her consciousness, there was only rejection left. Rejection of all the dark power approaching. But it was so painful. "God, why didn't you come and save me? You still refuse to give up?" Chaos Darkness looked at the figure in front of him. It was already the 6th day. The silver-haired figure in front of him was already shrouded in a thick layer of black fog. Her body was completely surrounded by the power of darkness. However, the dark energy could only strut around her body. His eyes were still pure silver. Only when her core turned black and her eyes were stained with darkness could the fusion between them be considered a true success. Chaos Darkness was a little anxious. She spoke in a low voice, and her voice drifted into Gu Shengyin's ears. "What are you still holding on for? Carrie, you're in so much pain. Your God didn't even come. He gave up on you. Carrie, you're no longer pure. You belong to the darkness. These voices kept echoing in Gu Xingyin's mind. Her consciousness began to fall into a trance. The system panicked. It called out to its host again and again, trying to remind her not to give up. Gu Xingyin could no longer feel her body. Why hasn't God come yet? I can't hold on anymore. God, have you really given up on me? God, the pair of pale golden eyes on the throne suddenly opened. 2 updates are up. See you later. Give me a ticket after you've finished reading. Chapter 1853. He felt inexplicably flustered. God had never felt this way since the creation of the world. What happened? God looked from heaven to the human world. Where was Carrie? He finally realized that something was wrong. He couldn't find Carrie. There shouldn't be any place in the world that the God of creation couldn't see, unless someone deliberately blinded his perception. The golden light in God's golden eyes soared, and his huge divine sense swept to every corner of the world. With just one glance, God was furious. Damn chaotic darkness! Chaotic darkness, who was waiting for Carrie to surrender, felt something in her heart. Oh no, God noticed it. She wanted to leave, but she couldn't. God came to Carrie's side in an instant. His golden eyes widened, and he looked at the figure in front of him who was covered by the strong dark power in disbelief. Was this Carrie? God waved his hand, and a gentle golden light fell on Gu Xingyin's body. The layer of black fog on the surface of her body was all dispelled. Gu Xingyin half opened her eyes and tried to look at God. She opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, her mouth just fell down weakly. She closed her eyes peacefully. No matter what, God finally came. Deity reached out his hand subconsciously and held Carrie's falling body. With just one touch, he knew how bad she was at the moment. The dark power on the surface of her body was just a small matter. There was still a strong dark power raging inside her body. He temporarily suppressed the dark power, but he couldn't expel it in a short time. God looked at chaotic darkness with his cold golden eyes. For the first time, God showed his anger so clearly. Damn you! Chaotic darkness just looked at Gu Xingyin with pity. If God had noticed it a little later, one day in the human world would have been just a moment in heaven. She was so close. She was so close to completely merging with the body in front of her. But now, all her efforts were in vain. Chaotic darkness also knew that the silver-haired God in front of her wouldn't give her any more chances. She sighed and said, I admit defeat, God. I should have died long ago, but I shouldn't be in your hands. You can't hurt me. As she spoke, her body suddenly turned into a cloud of smoke. The black illusion also disappeared in an instant, revealing the blue sky and white clouds that belonged to the human world. God did not move. He let the chaotic darkness leave. He knew very well that chaos darkness was right. He couldn't do anything to her. The current chaotic darkness had already completely merged with the world's laws. Unless he fought against the laws of the entire world, he would not be able to do anything to the chaos darkness. Even if he could defeat the laws of the world, it would be useless. The law of the world was just an emotionless law of life. Even if he were to kill it, the ones who would suffer would only be the living beings in the world that he had once personally created. This debt, he would remember it well. God looked down at the figure in his arms. The next moment, he appeared in the great cathedral. As the rich Holy Spirit power came rushing toward him, Gu Xingyin, who had been lying quietly in the arms of the god, suddenly began to tremble violently. It hurts, it hurts. The dark power, which had been suppressed by God, suddenly encountered such a powerful dark power. It seemed to have sensed danger and started to fight back in her body again. It seemed to want to make a final struggle. Chapter 1854. God, God, I'm in so much pain. The silver hair of the figure in his arms was already wet with cold sweat. She opened her unfocused eyes and stared blankly at the empty space in front of her. She could only scream unconsciously. God's heart twitched. Looking at Carrie like this, an emotion that he had never felt before rose in his heart. Close to the left side of his heart, there was a faint, fine pain. He put Gu Shangyin into the holy pond of the great cathedral. The holy pond was completely golden with faith and Holy Spirit power. Gu Shangyin used to like this place the most. But now, as soon as her body sank in, the water in the holy pond boiled. Before she could scream in pain, a warm body hugged her from behind. Cool and gentle energy flowed into Gu Shangyin's body from every part of her body. When the dark power encountered this cool and gentle energy, it all retreated anxiously as if it had encountered a flood or a ferocious beast. But how could their speed compare to this energy? Like spring snow meeting the sun, the dark power was swallowed and melted when it encountered this energy. Nothing was left. The pain in her body seemed to slowly lessen. The pain on Gu Shangyin's face gradually disappeared, and she gradually calmed down. She let out a soft moan and relaxed her back, leaning towards the back of the bed. Her body's instincts told her that she could rely on that place. God's miracle doctor froze because of this. Just now, to ensure that his divine power could be used on Carrie to the greatest extent, he used a spell to take off their clothes. Earlier, he was anxious, and Carrie's body was stiff from the pain. He didn't notice this at all. But now, he could feel Carrie's soft body leaning into his arms. He could clearly feel her soft and smooth skin rubbing against his body. God, he had never had such an intimate moment with any living creature. At this time, the Book of Creation appeared out of nowhere. God, your ears are a bit red. Pa. God waved his hand subconsciously. The Book of Creation flew out of the Holy Church in a parabola and landed at the feet of a seraph. Lucifer, who was just about to report to the Holy Church. When he saw what was under his feet, his pupils shrank. He recognized the Book of Creation, the divine artifact that accompanied God. Who would dare to throw the Book of Creation around like that? There was only one answer. Lucifer stopped in his tracks. He bent down and picked up the Book of Creation that was lying on the ground, pretending to be dead. He closed it again and asked gently, "Book of Creation, is it inconvenient for God to see me now?" The Book of Creation had always been fond of the beautiful Lucifer. It cleared its throat, intending to maintain its dignity as a divine artifact, and said with a serious tone, "The God is currently busy. If there is nothing important, Your Highness, please come back another day." If they were to disturb God at this time, even His Highness Lucifer wouldn't have a good ending. Lucifer was quite perceptive. He hurriedly said, "There is nothing important. I will come back another day." After Lucifer left, the Book of Creation looked sadly at the sky. Sigh, I don't know if God can truly understand my feelings this time. 4 chapters. I'll try to write 2 more chapters before dinner. Begging for monthly votes. The monthly votes list has been dropping since the 2nd. Crying. Chapter 1855. Gu Shangyin was still a little confused. As far as she could remember, she had never seen such a god. Without the layer of holy light that always separated him from the world, there seemed to be a trace of human emotions in his indifferent golden eyes. However, he was indeed the God of creation. "God?" she shouted uncertainly. God's gaze softened. He reached out a hand. Gu Shangyin was a little confused. God said, "You've been asleep for a long time." Gu Shangyin was confused. So, was there something wrong? Although she was puzzled, Gu Shangyin still obediently reached out her hand and put it in God's hand. It turned out that God's palm was so warm. Then, she stood up. The moment she supported her body with her legs, Gu Shangyin finally understood why God reached out to her. Her leg muscles were sore and weak, and she couldn't exert any strength at all. What was wrong with her? Gu Shangyin's attention returned to her body from God's abnormality. She confirmed her previous feeling. She couldn't find the slightest bit of light energy in her body now. In other words, Carrie, who was once powerful enough to be comparable to the seraph in heaven, had now become a useless person with an empty body. God wrapped his arms around Gu Shengyin's waist and held her in his arms. Gu Shengyin was shocked. She felt that this God was very strange. She looked at God in shock. Based on her understanding of gods over the past tens of thousands of years, God was definitely not such a gentle God who would casually allow others to get close to him. So, how long had she been asleep? What had happened in this short period of time? God naturally saw Gu Shengyin's surprise. He didn't explain anything. After confirming that Carrie seemed to have lost the power to walk freely for the time being, he directly exerted force in his arms and carried her up. If Gu Shengyin's emotions were countless messy symbols when she was held by God earlier, then now, they were a bunch of incomprehensible codes. God, she said with difficulty. Carrie can do it herself. God's hand didn't move as he walked towards the holy pond. You can walk? He asked indifferently. Gu Shengyin felt a little strange. He could have just teleported her directly to the holy pond, so why did he have to carry her personally? The next moment, she was surrounded by a warm energy. Then, she realized that her body was empty, and the clothes on her body had disappeared. Gu Shengyin. There was still a God on the other side. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at his expression. As expected, his face was still calm, as if he didn't care about the perfect body in front of him at all. But even so, it was still very embarrassing. God said, 3,000 years ago, you were attacked by chaos darkness. The light power in your body was polluted. It has been completely purified by the holy pond. What he said was basically what Gu Shengyin had been through all these years. 3,000 years? Gu Shengyin was a little dizzy from this timeline. Was this really heaven? The days passed like flowing water. Then, the power in her body was purified, which meant, from today onwards, you need to start absorbing the light power again and slowly recover your previous strength, God said. Gu Shengyin nodded. Although she felt like she had returned to the time before liberation, she had nothing to do in heaven anyway. Chapter 1856. God looked at Carrie with a calm expression. He didn't seem to be very disappointed. He was relieved. God knew that many angels were very obsessed with power. Losing great power was something that many angels could not accept. He was worried that Carrie would be sad, but obviously, he underestimated Carrie's temperament. That was good. In that case, it was time to get down to business. Gu Shengyin found that God, who should have left, didn't leave. Instead, he looked at her with a serious face. His eyes made her a little confused. She also felt a little guilty. Wait, why did she feel guilty? Gu Shengyin thought about it and felt that she didn't do anything. So she asked, God, what's the matter? She meant that if there was nothing, he could go back to the great sage hall. God nodded solemnly and said, Yes, there is something. Gu Shengyin wanted to say that even if he had something to do, he could wait for a while. It seemed inconvenient for her now. Then God spoke. I'm hugging you. Don't you like it? Gu Shengyin's eyelids trembled. What kind of question was that? She looked at God with confusion. She really wanted to pull out the system and ask if the person in front of her had been possessed. But the clear lotus fragrance and the familiar soul feeling from the person beside her made her know that the person in front of her had always been the God of creation. He had never changed. So, what was wrong with him? Was God stimulated by something? No, that was not the point now. The point was, how should she answer now? Say that she liked him? To be honest, she did like him. But according to the laws of heaven, God didn't like this kind of thing. Gu Shengyin couldn't guarantee what kind of reaction God would have if she said she liked him. But he didn't like her? She didn't want to lie against her heart. God looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he asked, Is it difficult to answer my question? Gu Shengyin looked up and nodded gently. I like it. She decided to tell the truth. Since she said she liked him, she might as well go all out. Gu Shengyin looked up at God and said, "Carrie likes to be close to God." After she finished speaking, she looked at God in front of her and waited for his reaction. Then, in the next moment, his body was surrounded by a wave of warmth. It wasn't the warmth of the holy pond, but a real body. Gu Shengyin was terrified. "Save me. What happened in the past 3,000 years? Why can't I understand it at all?" Deity said in a low voice, "That's good. I also like being close to Carrie." Gu Shengyin was stunned. What did she just hear? Gu Shengyin stood there in a daze, allowing their skin to touch. She forcefully closed her eyes and felt the warmth around her. Once again, she was sure that she was not dreaming. She turned around and faced the god's face. Her voice trembled as she said, "God." His golden eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. His lips didn't move, but his low voice sounded in the center of her mind. "Don't doubt what's in front of you, Carrie. I like you." Gu Shengyin's eyes suddenly widened because of this. It seemed that at this moment, Carrie's emotions controlled her. Shock, ecstasy, and sadness made her want to cry. She had buried the feelings in her heart for hundreds of thousands of years. She was even prepared to never say them out loud. Who would have thought that one day she would get a response? The 8th update. There are 2 more updates. Tomorrow, I'll try to set an update time on time so that everyone doesn't have to update all the time. After the last 2 updates, I'll think about which time is better. See you later. Chapter 1857. Gu Shengyin stared at God in a daze. She only felt that everything in front of her was too unreal. How did you? She wanted to ask so many things, but when she opened her mouth, she forgot where to start. A gentle kiss landed on her eyelashes. "Don't doubt it. Don't be nervous. Jialian, accept me. Just like accepting the faith from the light. That's good." Nobody knew when it started, but the water in the sacred pond started to sway gently. A low sobbing sound rang out, and then, it was forcefully blocked by something. There was no day or night in heaven. The Book of Creation squatted on the throne, bored. It was connected to the God of Creation's body and mind. At this moment, the Book of Creation was very clear about what its master was doing. Finally, it was enlightened. It thought with relief. A gust of wind from somewhere suddenly blew. The pages of the Book of Creation flipped automatically and landed on a certain page. The Book of Creation's heart shook. This was the scene of the future that it and God had forcibly seen together. But this time, it wasn't forcibly seen. The Book of Creation had automatically shown it. There was only one possibility for the future to appear in the Book of Creation, an established and unchangeable fate. The Book of Creation suddenly felt that any gossip was meaningless. Its low voice sighed in the great cathedral. "Your Highness." When God appeared in the great cathedral again, the Book of Creation had returned to its former appearance. "How is Her Highness Jialian?" it asked. God glanced at it. "A little tired. She's resting now." The Book of Creation didn't speak. God sat on the throne. After a long time, he suddenly said, "What did you see?" As the master of the Book of Creation, he naturally sensed certain things. Seeing that God asked, the Book of Creation didn't say anything. Its body floated automatically, and a scene appeared in the void. God watched this scene expressionlessly from beginning to end. In the end, he lowered his noble head. "I'm sorry." The Book of Creation comforted its master. "It's not your fault, God. This is destiny." God suddenly looked up. "What is destiny? As the God of creation, why can't I go against the will of heaven?" The Book of Creation. It didn't know how to answer this question. In the end, Deity fell silent. When Gu Shengyin woke up again, she was still on the bed where she woke up for the first time. But this time, she finally knew where she was. In the sleeping chamber of God. Of course, God usually sat on his throne, and this sleeping chamber was rarely used. She sat up. Thanks to the powerful recovery ability of this body, she did not feel any strong discomfort. Once again, he sighed with emotion. As expected of a god, this powerful endurance. She remembered that she seemed to have fainted in the end. The soft, snow-white quilt slid down from her body, revealing her naked body under the brocade. Starting from her collarbone, faint circles of red marks appeared on Carrie's pure and holy face, tainting it with the charm of lust. Gu Shengyin habitually looked inside her body and was surprised to find that there was a strong power of light in her body. Although it couldn't be compared to before she fainted, it was much better than when she had just woken up. Chapter 1858. The power of faith in the holy pond was so powerful? Gu Shengyin thought of something and blushed. At this time, God's voice sounded in her ear, "You're awake." Gu Shengyin responded softly. Then she put on her clothes and walked into the great cathedral. God was still the same as before, but when he saw Gu Shengyin come out, he removed the power of light from his body. "Come here." God reached out to her. Gu Shengyin walked forward without hesitation and reached out her hand. Then God pulled her into his arms. Gu Shengyin was a little surprised. Even if they were in a relationship, God didn't look like someone who would do such intimate things. God seemed to see her doubts. He explained softly, "The book of creation told me that you would like this." Gu Shengyin's ears blushed quietly. The book of creation, squatting next to the throne, was speechless. "God, please don't be so straightforward about some things. You deserve to be single for hundreds of thousands of years." But after God said this sentence, it seemed to have a good effect. The slight discomfort in Gu Shengyin's heart magically disappeared. Maybe when she was shy and uncomfortable, she suddenly found that the other person was a stranger than her. She suddenly calmed down. God said, "I will make our relationship public at the next creation celebration." Gu Shengyin was a little surprised. The first surprise was that God was going to make their relationship public. In this case, some laws in heaven would have to be changed. Gu Shengyin was also curious about what kind of new identity God was going to prepare for her. There was a second point. Why was it the next creation celebration? Was there anything special about it? She asked the question. God replied, "Of course you are my queen. Since you and I are together, it is natural for you to be my queen." As for the second point, God hesitated for a moment and then said, "Something bad will happen at the next creation celebration. Carrie, it's not appropriate to announce this news." Gu Shengyin always felt that when God said something bad, there was a moment of guilt on his face. However, the guilt only lasted for a moment. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination. Her attention was quickly attracted by something else. Something that even God thought was bad. She was a little worried. But he also knew that since God didn't say what it was definitely not suitable for him to know. The two of them chatted for a while. God suddenly said, "You have been in a coma for so many years. Lucian and the others are very worried. Now that you have woken up, go and meet with them." Gu Shengyin also felt that she needed to inform her companions. She returned to her palace and sent a message to the other blazing angels in her own name. The archangel's residence was the closest to the crystal sky. Lucifer was also the first to arrive at Gu Shengyin's place. He had a joyful smile on his face. "You're finally awake, Carrie." Gu Shengyin smiled at Lucifer. "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. I'm fine now." However, the smile on Lucifer's face stopped the next moment. His pale blue eyes were once again covered with melancholy. "Your body." Obviously, he had noticed that something was wrong with Gu Shengyin's body. Had Tseng Jin's power, which was comparable to his, disappeared? Gu Shengyin herself didn't care very much. Seeing Lucifer like this, she took the initiative to comfort him. "It's not a big deal. You will slowly recover in the future." Today's 10th update. Today, a baby proposed a fixed update time. Now set the time. If nothing goes wrong, it will be 8 chapters a day. 6:4 in the afternoon. 10:4 in the evening. Please vote. I'm going to write V Group Welfare and let myself go. Good night. Chapter 1859. There was still a trace of worry in Lucifer's eyes, but when Gu Shengyin looked over, he tried to make himself show a relaxed smile. He knew in his heart that since Carrie said that, she definitely didn't want to see her companions worry about her. The other seraphs also came quickly. Michael was still making a ruckus. When he saw Gu Shengyin, he said hurriedly, "Jialian, you're finally awake. I heard from God that you were injured and unconscious. Now you—" He was halfway through his words when he stopped halfway. Obviously, like Lucifer, Michael also noticed that there was something wrong with Gu Shengyin's body. The other seraphs also looked at her with worried eyes. Gu Shengyin could only repeat her conversation with Lucifer again and said that she was fine and didn't need to be too worried. Medellin saw that she didn't seem to want to talk about this topic, so he smiled and said something casually to change the topic. Gu Shengyin was attracted by what Medellin said. She asked curiously, "Medellin, you said that an emissary who specializes in spreading the gospel of God has appeared in the human world and is already regarded as God's spokesperson in the mortal world?" Medellin nodded with a look of admiration. "Yes, I once went down to the human world to see the Holy Son. He is indeed a very outstanding believer." His words didn't hide his praise for the mortal called Holy Son at all. Lucifer also smiled and said, "It is a great fortune for God to have such a believer in the human world." Gu Shengyin frowned slightly. She always felt that when she heard the name Messiah, she had a strange feeling in her heart. Maybe she was thinking too much. She comforted herself. He was just a mortal. Even if he was a great sage and wise man in the human world, what did it matter if his soul was taken into heaven after death? He and the seraphs had no conflict at all. At this time, Gu Shengyin didn't know that she thought of everything too simply. At this time, when the 8 seraphs of heaven talked about the Holy Son called Messiah, they still smiled and didn't pay attention to it. The lifespan of mortals was short. Moreover, a day in heaven was equivalent to a year in the mortal world. Gu Shengyin soon saw the true appearance of the Messiah. God had personally conveyed the oracle to all the angels: "Go to the great cathedral and have an audience with the Holy Son." Gu Shengyin was shocked. God actually used the word audience. Since the birth of heaven, there had only ever been 8 blazing angels who were qualified to be met by all the angels. Was God going to bestow this mortal with supreme glory? She arrived at the great sage hall and looked at her companions. She could clearly see the bewilderment on their faces. Lucifer was still standing closest to God. As long as he stood there, he would be the most dazzling existence among the many seraphs. Just like his title, Brilliant Morning Star, the brightest star at dawn before the birth of dawn. Many angels didn't understand what was going on, but when they saw the gentle smile on His Highness Lucifer's face, they calmed down. God came quickly. At the same time, all the angels discovered that when God appeared on the throne, a figure also appeared in the void in front of him. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a holy smile on his face. His appearance was very beautiful, not inferior even among the angels. Chapter 1860. He did not look around. Instead, he lowered his head slightly and faced the God in front of him with a very respectful posture. God's indifferent voice reached the ears of all the angels. "Holy Son Messiah, my substitute in the human world, the great wise one who preaches the gospel. Now that you have returned to heaven, you should be a seraph." As soon as God's voice fell, the spirit of speech instantly took effect. Gu Shengyin, who was not far from Messiah, clearly sensed that as the God's words fell, the power in Messiah's body in front of her was continuing to grow at a very terrifying speed. That powerful and uncontrollable aura directly forced her body to go soft, and she almost retreated. A hand promptly supported her body from behind, and a gentle light energy flowed into her body, offsetting the discomfort she felt. Gu Shengyin knew who it was. The only one standing on her right was the seraph Captain Lucifer. Gu Shengyin could not speak now. She could only turn her head and smile gratefully at Lucifer. She knew that if she had really been forced back by Messiah's aura just now, then in the eyes of the other angels, she would not be able to defeat Messiah. Although heaven was not purely based on strength, if she really showed that she was not as good as Messiah, her prestige among the angels would definitely be greatly reduced. Gu Shengyin did not have any hostility toward this companion, but she did not want to be used as a stepping stone on the first day of his official debut. Messiah seemed to take a while to adapt to his new identity. He knelt down excitedly to God, indicating that from now on, he would be more determined in his faith and serve God wholeheartedly. The next ceremony was for Holy Son Messiah to accept the worship of all the angels as a seraph. Looking at Messiah, who was worshipped by countless high-level angels, a strange thought suddenly arose in Gu Shengyin's mind. Something seemed to have changed in this heaven. It was different from her worries. The other seraphs were still very welcoming to the sudden addition of a companion, although it was a little sudden. In their minds, being able to get the approval of God meant that Messiah was indeed worthy of this honor. In the eyes of the angels, the will of the gods was the highest law. Messiah's personality was very good. Compared to the seraphim highnesses who had always been high and mighty in the hearts of the angels, he was more easygoing. Soon, he had a large group of admirers in heaven. Gu Shengyin felt more and more uneasy. She always felt that there was a special meaning behind God's actions. She went to see God alone. There was no intimate snuggling. She knelt on the white jade floor of the great sage hall in an extremely serious and pious manner, expressing her uneasiness. Deity listened to her quietly. Gu Shengyin felt a gentle force lift her up. Then the words of God rang in her ears. "Carrie, I'm going to do something that I'm very unwilling to do, but I can't change. Don't get involved. This matter." For the first time, Gu Shengyin realized that there were still things in this world that the God of creation could not solve. A thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Was it because of the balance between light and darkness? She knew this. She had seen the flaw of this world a long time ago. The power of light was too strong. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.